Welcome to Afterlife Radio, and we're Afterlife video vlogging today. Myself and my co-host, Billy Roberts, coming to you live from England. And we're going to talk a little bit about those interdimensional beings, because I have some questions for you, Billy. These interdimensional beings, okay, I understand we're on different vibrational rates. A lot of people understand that we get that there's different variables of dimensions and levels of existence, and obviously there's portals in which that these beings can come through. But you know, there's one thing I always thought about. Lots of people have reported having instances with what they're calling extraterrestrial beings, or aliens, if you will. And I've always wondered, are they really extraterrestrial beings, or are they perhaps interdimensional beings? What do you think?
Well, it's just my opinion. I believe these extraterrestrials, so-called, come from the future of our own planet, and perhaps not from another planet. We've discussed before, we live in a multi-dimensional universe in which there are worlds within worlds, each rising in a gradually ascending vibratory scale. And those which touch and blend with the higher planes of the physical world, to those which gradually merge with the lower planes of the astral world. So we have to understand that the astral world, or these more subtle dimensions, they're not places. They have nothing to do with places. And we can access them when we're sleeping or in meditation. So I think a lot of these beings come primarily to help us, to give us some guidance and encouragement. And it's just, again, my opinion is about the pandemic. I think this is a part of some kind of greater plan to make the human species more aware of things, the way we're destroying the planet. Because I think the planet is a living organism. She lives, she breathes, and we inhabit it, perhaps for a short space of time. One of my teachers many, many years ago, he said that we used to occupy a place on the moon. He said that this is an astral being. And although I didn't believe him at the time, I thought it was a bit too far-fetched and fanciful. I'm beginning to wonder now, a lot of these places like Mars and the moon and other planets, maybe we did occupy them at one time, prehistory. And I think that we're going through the motions again, through the vibratory motions. We're destroying the planet upon which we live. And perhaps in 1,000 years' time, we'll have to vacate the planet and move to another planet out there somewhere. So I think they're already amongst us, these multidimensional creatures. But, you know, we are made up of different bodies, and each body is composed of a finer material than the one below it. So we're like musical tones, if you like. We vibrate at different frequencies. And as we develop our consciousness, we start to vibrate higher and higher frequencies and start to resonate with other people and attract. We attract other people, and we also attract these other aliens, if you like, these people who come to the planet. I think it was George King. He started the Aetherius Society. And they believe, and it's made up of doctors and scientists, and they chant into a magnetic box. I don't know whether you've heard of him.
No, I haven't.
They chant into in strategic places to give energy to these crafts, these beings who come from another planet. And they believe that, you know, a lot of the sightings have occurred in Mexico and in England. There are certain geographical places where these crafts have been seen. My wife, Dolly, was privy to one encounter some years ago. So I believe, you know, I don't know a lot about it, but I do, a lot of it's supposition, conjecture, but also it's open to the imagination. We all have imaginations about the things that we think are going to happen in the future. You know, these people who wrote books like Superman and Batman and all these futuristic things, I think they were privy to certain knowledge that was given to them. And I think, what do you believe?
The jury's out on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
I've interviewed people, and particularly a gentleman very recently who's from a place not far from here, a place in Mississippi, in fact, where my family was from. And he had an experience in the 1970s. He's written a couple of books on it. And most recently, the original police file has come to the internet, where he and his friend who had the experience made the police report of what happened. So he's been getting a lot of attention about this for the last 40 years. And I completely believe that he had the experience that he said he had. He's got no reason to make it up. He was not looking for notoriety. In fact, he kept it to himself for a great number of years before he even wrote his book. So he wasn't looking for fame and fortune over this. He had no reason. In fact, in the police interview, it was his friend doing most of the talking because he was quite shy about it. He felt awkward that it even happened and was talking about it. So, this came to light, and I had the fortune of interviewing him. And I've always kind of wondered, these people who are adamant that they have these experiences, and I believe they have had these experiences, but I have to wonder, are they really beings from another planet or another galaxy, or are they beings from another dimension? And that's what I've always kind of wondered about, especially when you look at these things like the ancient astronauts. If you've ever looked at some of these shows about the ancient astronauts, and there's ancient writings about beings coming in on spaceships and describing things that are like rockets. I mean, even in the Old Testament, I think it's Ezekiel, where they describe what sounds like rocket ships. So, you have to wonder, okay, are some of these beings that people see, are they actually what we would call also spiritual beings that are just coming in through these portals? And I think it's an interesting subject as to, where are they coming from? Why do they pick certain people? Why do they not pick certain people? It's all very, very strange. It's interesting, but I do believe that these people who claim to have had these experiences do indeed have them. And, I'd like to find out more about it. So I just thought I'd get your opinion, because, it's just still a mystery to a lot of people. And a lot of people want to kind of debunk it and say, oh, it doesn't happen. But I believe it does.
Yeah. I hosted or presented a TV series called Secrets some years ago. And there was a guy on there. He was an expert in UFOs, ufology. And he brought a lady along who claimed to have been an abductee. She was abducted. She lost hours from her life. And she claimed to have had something implanted at the back of her ear. But what I found about this woman, I can't remember her name anyway, so it doesn't matter. I found that she was a bit strange psychologically. And I've seen a few people, and if you look at them, there's something different about them. They're not normal, are they, these people? I mean, you say the guy wasn't seeking fame and fortune, but when you talk to them, there is something different about them. Now, that doesn't mean to say that they're lying, but it could mean that they're connected in some way. You remember the 1970s series, The Invaders? Do you remember that American series?
Vaguely.
And that really stimulated my interest in UFOs and aliens. And there's a lot of truth in it. It could be. I don't know. At the risk of being a crank, I'm like you. It's open. I'm open-minded.
Yeah, that's how I feel. But because and then there's these other things, and these are things that we've talked about in some of the other shows. We also talked about, there's this big rage out there of people talking about, and it sounds kind of crazy, reptilians, these other types of, hybrid people who mix DNA with alien DNA. And, it really kind of makes one wonder if maybe different people from different sections of the world maybe had come from other planets or other dimensions. But, the whole reptilian thing, which seems kind of crazy, but I remember actually seeing, and I just recently brought this up on one of my other shows about a childhood experience, because I did see spirits as a child. and I had very, very early instances. I can remember being held by my mother, given a bottle, and seeing some certain things. But I remember specifically one instance where something was walking down my hallway, and I was in the den, the TV was on, there was no lights, but I saw this shadowy figure, and it had a big long tail, almost like a reptile looking thing, just wandering down the hallway. And I'll never forget that. And I never knew what it was. And everybody thought I was crazy, because when I mentioned it, people were like, no, people don't see those things. And I got written off as having a very,
vivid imagination.
Good imagination. And of course, my mother, who was very, very Catholic, said it was the devil because I was bad. And and if you're not good, you will see that thing again. But, I have to, now you're seeing all these things about reptilians, and that thing comes to mind. I'm like, interesting. Maybe that was some sort of interdimensional being that was maybe intersecting where I was. It didn't seem to be aware of me, but it was just there, and it kind of just wandered on through down the hallway. What do you think?
I think certain beings can transmute into other forms, particularly the not demonic, but people who are quite evil when they were alive in this world. When they pass over, they don't suddenly become angelic with wings. They still have evil in them. The only thing is they don't have access to people, but they do have access to our minds. And I think that they can sometimes transmute. Now, we were looking for a film to watch, and stupidly, my wife and I turned on to Insidious. I don't know if you've seen it.
I saw the original one, and I'm not a real big fan of paranormal movies, just simply because I know how it works, and I see stuff and I go, that's not real realistic. But go on.
What was interesting about it, which I thought, because we'd seen it before and we'd forgotten, is the fact that this man had a son who was in a coma, and he to all intents and purposes, there was nothing wrong with him. He'd been examined in hospital, and there was nothing at all wrong with him. He was in a coma that they couldn't explain. So they brought in a medium and a paranormal group with all the sophisticated equipment. And they found that this kid had been taken into the astral world by these beings. And his father was put into a hypnotic trance. And his father allegedly went in to the astral world to get his son, and encountered all these demonic beings. These people.
Oh, wow. Now I have to go watch it. I'm going to have to go watch it now.
Well, I won't tell you the ending, because the ending put me off right away. But I thought it was interesting that he located his son and managed to get his son out of his astral body back, which is feasible. But the ending, I thought, God, the medium that they brought in to help them, she took a photograph of his father, and it wasn't him. He was one of the demons. And he went berserk, and he strangled the medium because there's no one else in the room. But when the family came in and saw the medium dead, they were looking for the husband, and he was nowhere around. Well, it ended there. And I hate these kind of endings. But
now you have to watch the next one.
Insidious 2. But
was that the first Insidious that you watched? That was that one?
That was the first one, yeah. That was the first one. But we'd seen it before.
I've seen it before too, and I don't think I mustn't have watched the whole thing. It didn't hold my interest because I don't remember any of this. I just remember seeing something that I thought was very disturbing, and it was where the little boy looked at something, and it was this weird little shadowy thing kind of dancing there, and I was just like, it reminded me of something I saw in my childhood. I'm like, I don't like that thing. Whatever that thing is, I don't like it. And I found it to be which is weird for me to find something like that to be disturbing. And I don't know, I guess I didn't watch the whole movie, but now I have to, and now you have to watch Insidious too.
Well, Hollywood have a lot to answer for, because the way they create these paranormal movies, people think it's real. And I think Hollywood and television, they've got a lot, because they create these demons, and people do think it's genuine and real. And I find it a little bit unnerving, because a lot of paranormal groups they seem to copy other television programs.
They do, and that's a shame. It's really a shame, because back in the day, like when I started learning this, there were no television shows. There weren't any. There was no internet. I mean, you had to figure stuff out for yourself.
Exactly.
And it was very difficult, because you had to learn the hard way. You had to find somebody else that did it if you wanted a mentor, and you had to go about it. I mean, I remember, trying to get spirit photography back before digital, and I remember having to buy the black and white infrared film, and you'd have to keep it in the refrigerator, and you couldn't, if light hit it, it was no good. So you'd have it in the refrigerator, and then you'd have to put it in the camera in one of those boxes where the light wasn't in, so you couldn't really see what you're doing. You're putting it in there, and then you might take 50 pictures and you get nothing. So everybody thinks it's like TV, and it's not. So I get frustrated watching some of the TV shows. I watched one a couple of times. Well, I watched two. I watched one that some friends were on, and I enjoyed that. But I watched one, and I won't name the name of the show, but I happened to see 2 episodes of a particular television show that is still on, I think, today. And one of them was, supposedly the person was possessed. It was out in the middle of a cornfield in the Midwest, somewhere in the middle of the country, and they said, we need to get an exorcist. And within 20 minutes, they had a Catholic priest there doing an exorcist. And I was like, no, it doesn't work that way. It was what you would have to go through to get a priest or a bishop to be there to do an exorcism. It just wasn't very realistic. So I thought it was silly. So then I watched the next episode, and when they got to they found this little doll, like a voodoo doll. And I happened to recognize it as one of the little dolls that you would buy in the French market, like a little souvenir. And I even recognized, and I knew who made it, because I remember the person who made those dolls, and they were strict. They were not ritualized dolls. It had nothing to do with, voodoo dolls don't have anything to do with the religion of voodoo anyway. But there was these little stick dolls with the moss on it, and they said, "Oh my God, it's a voodoo doll." And the guy said, "Well, voodoo is it's a voodoo doll. That's the dark side of Santeria." And I was like, "I'm done. I cannot watch this stuff anymore. It's just." And I've heard people, even 10 years later, people recite that. Well, Santeria is the negative side of voodoo. It's like, no, it's really not. It really isn't. And I almost, last fall, I was visiting somewhere, and in someone else's building, videotaping them, and the person said it, and I said very politely, I said, "Well, no, not really." And she got very upset with me, because I said it, but it was like, it's like, and I even knew where the source came from. And I'm like, gosh, she really has no idea where, these are 2 different religions that are coming from 2 different places. And it's like, oh my gosh. So I don't watch any of that stuff anymore, because it just brought forth this very negative, critical side of myself coming out. So I will watch Insidious now because of this conversation.
But also, Claire, have you heard of something called scotograph?
No.
Scotograph. S-K-O-T. I'll tell you something about it, because I used to run a center in Liverpool, and we had a guy came, and he had photographic paper, and he gave a piece to each person in the room, and they had to hold it for 15-20 minutes, after which time, and it needs to have somebody in their mind, somebody in the spirit world. I had, I didn't have anybody in particular, but we had to queue up then after this period had elapsed, and he would put it through the process of developing fluid and fixative, and lo and behold, they had images on, faces of people. And mine had you won't know about this, but Tall Pine, I've come to know him, is somebody I've grown up with. He was a sort of a North American Indian. He wasn't really, but he appeared like that. And it was him. But unfortunately for me,
Wow.
and most of the people, it didn't last, even though it had been fixed. But it's called scotograph. And I've Googled it many times and I've not been able to find it, but it came up on a TV program once. So I know it exists. This guy has since passed over, and I thought it was very interesting, the fact that you can hold it. Yeah.
And I saw some things like that. And I'm sure you've heard of it too. Types of physical phenomena. I saw some things in the museum up in Lilydale, New York. It's a spiritual camp, and they have a lot of things there. And there were actually instances, different mediums throughout the ages, who were able to get that kind of phenomena. There were some that could do paintings. They would just put the I guess, what do you call it? The palette or whatever there, and they would just leave it out for spirit to work on it, and they would have their circle, and spirit would produce a drawing or a painting. And there's been a lot of that. In fact, if you saw the skull experiment, they did something with the rolls of film, and they put the rolls of film in the middle of the circle, and they later went and developed that, and there were actually things on the rolls of film. We did try and experiment with that in our circle at some point. We tried it a couple of times and got nothing. But it's interesting. It's interesting, how that kind of transpires. And I guess you can never predict who would be able to have luck with something like that and who wouldn't, because there seems to be a trend of certain people have certain connections that they're able to get certain phenomena that other people are not.
Yeah.
And it all seems to be very legit as well.
Well, some years ago in the same center, we had a little lady. She was in her late 70s, but really old for her. She'd been a school teacher, and she was an automatist. She could write, she could read a book, and with one hand, and her other hand would write on the paper, allegedly in a deceased person's handwriting. And I was talking to her, and I said to her, how did this develop? And she said, I had a Church of England background. Nothing paranormal for me. She said, I was very churchy. She said, but the neighbor across the street lost their husband. And it was the day of the funeral. She said, and I was sitting by my desk in the front room of my house, watching the funeral cards. She said, and I was writing a letter to my son. She said, and I was looking out the window. Before I knew it, I looked down at my hand. The handwriting, it was all handwriting scribbled on the paper. And when she read it, it was from the person whose funeral it was, the neighbor's husband. So she left it a week or so. And then she'd gone over to the woman and said, I hope you don't mind me asking you this. And she showed the lady the handwriting, and he had very unusual handwriting, the man, apparently. And the woman started to cry, and she vouched that it was her husband's handwriting, and it was a message for her. Now, I had this woman. She came to my center, and she did a demonstration. All that she did was sat down in front of the audience, and she'd call out a name of a person in the audience, and then she'd proceed to write a message, and it was always in a different handwriting. And from what I can recall, it was only one person who said, I didn't recognize the handwriting. They didn't recognize it. But she was absolutely amazing, and she was writing a book at the time all about it. She was brilliant. I can't remember her name, so that's very helpful.
Wow. Yeah, one of the girls in my circle does automatic writing, and it's pretty phenomenal. Yes. Her grandmother comes through. Pardon me?
especially when the writing is different each time.
Oh, that I don't know. She only does that with her grandmother coming through though. So it's always the grandmother. It's always in Portuguese. All right, well, Billy, this has been a lot of fun. So we're going to have to do this again. This was our first try at doing the video thing, and I think it's going to work out really well. So stay tuned and keep an eye on our YouTube channel and subscribe to it, because we're going to have more video shows for you, as we will more radio podcasts. Have a great day, folks. Bye-bye.